The morning of May 10th arrived shrouded in a thick, damp mist. It clung to the tall pines surrounding the isolated lake house, making the world outside the windows seem like a ghostly painting. The air was still, heavy with the scent of wet earth and the distant, mournful cry of a loon. Inside the spacious cabin, four friends had sought a peaceful retreat from the city's relentless hum. But peace, it seemed, had packed its bags and departed in the night, leaving something far more sinister in its place. This was supposed to be a weekend of relaxation, of shared laughter and quiet contemplation by the water's edge. Maya, an artist with a soul often troubled by the world's harsh edges, was the first to stir. Sleep had eluded her, a common companion to her restless thoughts. She slipped out of bed, pulling a shawl around her shoulders, and tiptoed through the silent house. The old wooden floorboards creaked softly under her feet, a familiar sound in this rustic haven. She intended to greet the dawn by the lake, hoping the cool air and the gentle lapping of water would soothe her mind. The mist was even thicker down by the shore, swirling like a living entity. She walked slowly along the narrow path leading to the small, private dock. Dewdrops clung to the long grasses, sparkling like tiny diamonds in the faint pre-dawn light. As she neared the water, a shape became discernible through the thinning fog. At first she thought it was a log washed ashore, or perhaps a discarded boat cover. But as she drew closer, her breath caught in her throat. Her heart began to pound, a frantic drum against her ribs. The shape was far too still, too unnaturally arranged. It was a man. It was Dean Travers. He lay sprawled near the damp reeds, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring up at the gray, indifferent sky. His usually vibrant face was pale, a stark contrast to the dark wet patch staining his expensive cashmere sweater. A silent scream formed in Maya's throat before it tore through the morning's quiet, a raw sound of pure horror that echoed across the still water. It was a sound that would awaken not just the remaining occupants of the lake house, but also a chilling mystery that would grip them all. The scream shattered the morning's fragile peace. One by one the others stumbled out of the lake house, their faces etched with confusion and dawning alarm. Liam, Chloe and Noah gathered on the dew-laden grass, their eyes fixed on Maya, who stood frozen by the water, pointing a trembling finger. Then they saw him, Dean, their friend, the vibrant, often overbearing but undeniably charismatic center of their group. Now he was just a lifeless form, a terrible punctuation mark at the end of their idyllic getaway. The shock was a physical blow, stealing the air from their lungs. Liam was the first to regain some semblance of composure, though his face was ashen. He was Dean's business partner, known for his calm demeanor and logical mind. He was often the steady hand in their ventures, the one who thought before he spoke. He moved towards Dean's body, a grim set to his jaw, but stopped short, his training perhaps reminding him not to disturb a potential crime scene. He looked older in that moment, the usual spark in his eyes extinguished by the grim reality before them. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of disbelief. Chloe, a doctor, reacted with professional instinct mixed with personal grief. She had once been engaged to Dean, a romance that had cooled into a complex friendship. Her medical training kicked in as she knelt beside the body, her fingers searching for a pulse she knew she wouldn't find.
"He's gone,"
she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet her eyes betrayed the sorrow she felt. The finality of her words hung heavy in the damp air, a pronouncement that changed everything for the people gathered there. Noah, a writer with a nervous disposition, seemed to shrink into himself. He had always been the most sensitive of the group, easily overwhelmed. He owed Dean a small sum of money, a fact that now seemed to loom larger in his own mind. He wrung his hands, his gaze darting from the body to the faces of his friends, then to the dark, silent woods.
This can't be happening. It's a nightmare. It must be a nightmare.
But the cold, still form of Dean Travers was irrefutably real. The local police, two stern-faced officers named Miller and Davies, arrived after what felt like an eternity. The mist had begun to lift, but a chill remained, seeping into their bones. The lake house, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a trap. One by one, the friends were interviewed, their words carefully recorded. Each of them knew that, despite their friendships, they were now suspects. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and the desperate need to prove one's own innocence. The officers were polite but firm, their questions probing. Liam, ever the pragmatist, provided his account with measured calm. He stated he had retired to his room around 10:30 the previous evening. After a quiet game of cards, he claimed to have read for an hour or so before falling asleep.
I'm a heavy sleeper. The first thing I heard was Maya's scream this morning. Before that, nothing, absolutely nothing disturbed me.
His alibi seemed straightforward, simple, and difficult to disprove on its surface. He offered no extraneous details, just the bare facts as he recalled them. Maya, still shaken, recounted her sleepless night.
I couldn't settle. Dean and we had a small disagreement yesterday afternoon. Nothing serious, but it was on my mind.
She explained she had tossed and turned before finally deciding to go for an early walk around 5:30 a.m., hoping the fresh air would clear her head. It was then, she reiterated, that she had made the horrifying discovery. Her distress seemed genuine, her story consistent with her earlier reactions. Chloe, drawing on her medical composure, explained her evening.
I was feeling quite tired. We all had a glass of wine and I took a mild sleeping tablet around 11. I get occasional insomnia.
She claimed to have slept soundly, cocooned in her room, until the piercing sound of Maya's scream had jolted her awake.
I didn't hear a thing all night. The pill usually makes me sleep very deeply.
Like Liam, her alibi pointed to an uninterrupted night, a period of blissful unawareness while tragedy struck nearby. Noah, looking pale and anxious, told the officers he had stayed up late in the main living area.
I was trying to write. The inspiration just wasn't coming. I must have dozed off on the sofa around 1 or 2 in the morning.
He claimed he woke up disoriented when he heard Maya screaming. He insisted he hadn't left the living room all night and hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious before drifting off to sleep on the comfortable couch. As the initial shock began to subside, replaced by a grim determination to understand what had happened, small details of the surroundings started to gain significance. Officer Davies, a man with keen observational skills honed by years on the force, was methodically examining the area around the cabin. He noted the neatly stacked pile of firewood beside the large, stone-built outdoor fireplace. It was a generous supply, clearly intended for a substantial bonfire, the kind that would ward off the evening chill and provide a cheerful gathering point. The curious thing, however, was the condition of this wood. It was undeniably damp. Droplets of moisture clung to the rough bark and the cut ends felt cool and moist to the touch. This dampness was consistent with the heavy dew that had settled overnight, or perhaps even a light drizzle that might have passed unnoticed. The grass around the fireplace was similarly wet, glistening in the now strengthening morning light. It was clear the wood had been exposed to the elements for several hours at least, yet the fireplace itself told a different story. The grate was cold, filled with the gray ashes of a fire from days or even weeks past. There was no scent of recent smoke, no telltale warmth radiating from the stones. It was patently obvious that no fire had been lit there the previous evening, nor had any attempt been made to start one. The kindling lay untouched beside the larger logs, equally damp. This struck Officer Davies as peculiar, a small but discordant note in the tragic symphony. Why would someone go to the trouble of gathering a significant amount of firewood, enough for a roaring blaze, only to leave it unused? It suggested an intention, a plan that was interrupted or abandoned. Had Dean himself gathered the wood, perhaps anticipating a late-night chat by the fire with one of his friends? Or had someone else prepared it for a reason yet unknown? The damp, unused firewood sat there silently, a small, perplexing clue in a puzzle that was becoming increasingly complex and unsettling. Section 527, Missing Minutes, A Shadow of Doubt. The police continued their meticulous questioning, attempting to reconstruct the timeline of the previous night. They focused on the period after the friends had finished their card game and dispersed to their separate activities around 10:30 p.m. Dean had mentioned he might take a walk by the lake before turning in, a common habit of his. The estimated time of death, based on Chloe's preliminary assessment and the body's condition, was placed somewhere between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., a frustratingly wide window. As Officer Miller pressed for more precise details, a discrepancy began to emerge. Initially, everyone's account seemed to cover their movements or lack thereof. Liam was reading, Chloe was asleep, Maya was restless in her room, and Noah was supposedly on the sofa. However, under more focused questioning, Chloe's story developed a slight wobble. She admitted the sleeping pill hadn't worked as quickly as she'd hoped. She had, in fact, been awake for a while longer than she first stated.
I did get up once. Around midnight, I think. I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I was feeling restless and my throat was dry.
This was a new piece of information. When asked how long she was out of her room, she hesitated.
Not long, maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most?
But then she corrected herself.
Actually, I remember looking at the clock when I got back to my room. It was 12:27 a.m. I left my room just after midnight.
This admission created a stir. 27 minutes, a specific, quantifiable period during which Chloe was not in her bed as previously implied. Where had she been for nearly half an hour?
I just paced a bit in the hallway. I was thinking, my mind was racing.
But could she prove it? Had anyone seen her? The shadow of doubt, once diffuse, now began to coalesce around Chloe. 27 minutes was more than enough time for something terrible to happen. Section 6. Red herring, Maya's veiled animosity. With Chloe's unaccounted time hanging in the air, the investigators also turned their attention back to Maya. Her initial admission of an argument with Dean the previous afternoon was re-examined with greater scrutiny. While she had downplayed it as a small disagreement, other nuances began to surface. It appeared the dispute was about a collaborative art project Maya had poured her heart into, a project Dean had casually and rather cruelly dismissed as unmarketable during a phone call she overheard him having. He could be so dismissive, Maya admitted, tears welling in her eyes. He didn't understand how much that project meant to me. He called it a flight of fancy, and said I should focus on more commercially viable work. For an artist like Maya, such words from a friend and a perceived patron could indeed cut deep. The argument, it turned out, had been more heated than she initially let on, ending with Maya storming off, visibly upset. This provided a potential motive-wounded pride, anger, a sense of betrayal. Furthermore, Noah, when questioned again, hesitantly recalled seeing Maya near the lake path much later that evening, well after the card game had ended. It was dark, Noah said, but I'm fairly sure it was her. She was walking quickly back towards the house around 11:30. She looked intense. This placed Maya near the potential crime scene, alone, at a time closer to when Dean might have been killed. Her earlier claim of simply being restless in her room now seemed less complete. Maya didn't deny being out. Yes, I did go out for a bit, she conceded, her voice tight. After our argument, I couldn't stand being cooped up. I needed air. I walked down towards the lake, but not all the way to the dock. I just needed to cool off. She insisted this was long before she found the body, and long before midnight. But the seed of suspicion had been planted. An argument, a secret late-night walk near the lake, it painted a picture that was far from innocent. Section 7. Red herring, Noah's unsettling demeanor. Noah's anxiety, palpable from the moment Dean's body was discovered, did not lessen under the continued scrutiny of the police. If anything, it intensified. He fidgeted constantly, his fingers drumming on the armrest of his chair, his gaze rarely meeting that of Officer Miller or Davies. His answers, though seemingly straightforward, were delivered with a hesitation that suggested a troubled mind. He seemed to be weighing each word carefully as if afraid of saying the wrong thing, which paradoxically made him seem more suspicious. The matter of the money he owed Dean was brought up again. Noah had initially brushed it off as a small, friendly loan for some writing software. However, further probing revealed the sum was more significant than he implied, and Dean had recently, albeit gently, asked when he might expect repayment. For a struggling writer like Noah, this debt could have been a source of considerable stress, perhaps even desperation. Could a demand for repayment have escalated into something more violent? His alibi of falling asleep on the living room sofa also came under question. While he claimed to have been there all night after attempting to write, no one could definitively confirm seeing him there continuously from, say, 11 p.m. until dawn. Chloe had passed through the living room on her way to the kitchen for water around midnight, but she couldn't recall for certain if Noah was on the sofa then, or if he was, whether he was asleep or awake. The large room had many shadowy corners. Then, Noah volunteered a piece of information that seemed more confusing than helpful. I remember seeing a light, he said, his voice barely a whisper, very late. It flickered in Dean's room, just for a second or two. I thought maybe he was reading, or restless like Maya, but when pressed for a time he became vague. Sometime after 1, I think, or maybe closer to 2. This detail felt off. If Dean was already dead by then, who turned on the light? Was Noah trying to deflect attention, or had he truly seen something significant he couldn't quite place? Section 8. The cracks in Liam's facade. Throughout the unfolding drama, Liam had maintained an almost preternatural calm. He had been the voice of reason, the one offering steady support, his grief seemingly controlled and dignified. He answered questions clearly and concisely, his narrative unwavering. Yet, it is often the case that a surface too smooth can hide imperfections beneath. And slowly, tiny cracks began to appear in Liam's carefully constructed facade, almost imperceptible at first but there nonetheless for a keen eye to observe. Officer Davies, a man who trusted his instincts, revisited Liam's alibi. Liam had claimed to be reading a specific new thriller in his room. When Davies casually asked about the plot, Liam gave a vague, generic summary. Later, Davies discreetly checked the book in Liam's room. It was indeed there on the nightstand, but the spine was stiff, uncreased. A silk bookmark, the kind that comes with expensive editions, was neatly tucked between the first 2 pages. It looked as if the book had barely been opened, let alone read for an hour. Then came Chloe's re-evaluation of her missing 27 minutes. Pressed again about what she saw or heard while pacing in the hallway around midnight, she recalled something new, something she had initially dismissed. "I did see someone," she said slowly, her eyes widening slightly. "It was dark in the hallway but I saw a figure slip out the back door, the one leading towards the woods and the fireplace. I thought it might be Dean going for his walk, but then she added, he was tall, like Dean, or Liam." This led to a crucial question. Liam had claimed to be in his room reading, but Chloe's sighting, if accurate, and if it wasn't Dean, could only have been Liam or Noah. Noah was supposedly on the sofa. When confronted with Chloe's hazy memory, Liam at first denied being outside. Then with a sigh he admitted, "All right, yes, I did step out for a moment, I needed some air, I was going to have a cigarette." But Maya, a staunch anti-smoker, quickly interjected, "Liam, smoking? He quit 5 years ago. He detests cigarettes now." The lie, small but significant, hung in the air. And what about the firewood? Liam had been the one enthusiastically suggesting a bonfire earlier in the day. He had even helped gather some of the wood. Section 9. The Truth Unmasked. Liam's Cold Calculation. The revelation about the supposed cigarette, a habit Liam had vocally abandoned, was the key that unlocked the final door. All eyes turned to Liam, whose calm composure finally began to fray at the edges. His face, usually a mask of thoughtful control, twitched almost imperceptibly. Officer Miller, sensing the shift, pressed forward. "Mr. Henderson," he said, his voice firm but quiet, "Chloe's 27 minutes. Were they perhaps your 27 minutes?" Liam's silence was deafening. He looked down at his hands, then slowly he nodded. The carefully constructed alibis of the others, the red herrings of Maya's anger and Noah's anxiety, had been clever distractions. But Liam was the architect of the true deception. He confessed that those 27 minutes, the ones he had allowed Chloe to be stressed over, were indeed his. He had slipped out of the house after ensuring everyone else was settled. His motive, when it finally spilled out, was one of cold, hard business and deep-seated resentment. Dean, his longtime business partner, had been planning to dissolve their lucrative company, intending to strike out on his own, taking the most profitable clients and leaving Liam with significantly diminished prospects. It was a betrayal Liam could not stomach. His plan had been chillingly simple yet meticulously thought out. He had lured Dean outside under the pretext of finally having that bonfire they had discussed, a way to talk privately. The firewood he had gathered earlier was part of this ruse. Once outside, away from the house, the argument escalated. Liam, seeing his future crumble, struck Dean in a moment of fury, the attack swift and brutal. He then used the remaining time of those 27 minutes to stage the scene, moving Dean's body closer to the water's edge to make it look like an accident or an attack during a solitary walk. The damp firewood was an intentional piece of misdirection. He had hoped it would suggest Dean was preparing a fire alone when he was surprised. He had wiped his prints, returned to the house silently, and feigned sleep. He had subtly manipulated Chloe's uncertainty about the time, letting suspicion fall on her. He had counted on his reputation for calmness to shield him, but in the end, it was the small inconsistencies, the unread book, the phantom cigarette, that unraveled his cold, calculated crime. The quiet, logical friend had been the killer all along, his motive hidden beneath a veneer of civility.